this forced sterilization topic, which is not fully understood at the moment, but it's a big story going out there right now
Yeah.
about ICE detention center in Georgia. Apparently, there are whistleblower reports of it having not only unsanitary conditions, but also apparently forced hysterectomies of women. Now, the details are still sort of sparse, and of course, they're denying that this happened. And so I'm sure it's one of these things where we're going to find out details in the coming weeks. But obviously, that is a very, very disturbing story of
Yeah.
taking women and making those choices for individuals who, in some cases, didn't even understand their rights, what rights were available to them, and just thinking that this is what they had to go along with.
Yeah, and I was reading some of the quotes from the article from some of the women who experienced this trauma, and just talking about essentially how confused they were. Like what happened? I didn't even really understand until afterwards, and even now I'm not quite sure I really understand. Um, I mean, this is one of those stories, Chris, that, I mean, we were talking about this before we started streaming. I mean, this is one of those stories that's just hard to talk about because
Yeah,
the immeasurable amount of pure evil to do something like
right.
that. Well, we're just going to give you a hysterectomy without your consent. You know, it's one of those things that it's beyond the scope. And I don't even want to sort of lump in Republicans or Democrats in this, because I think that any decent person recognizes that this, wherever the line was, this is past it. This is
Right.
past the line, and we need to talk about making sure that doesn't happen now. With that said, there is one point which is becoming particularly controversial. And again, Chris, you were alluding to the fact that more information is still coming out, so we don't know, as of this stream right now, we don't really know all the details about this. But one of the details that's starting to emerge is there's a dispute about whether or not this was a lone doctor who was doing this because he had some kind of evil issues in his heart, doing these kinds of hysterectomies, or whether or not this came down as a kind of, well, we're worried about the fact that if a woman gets pregnant at one of these detention centers, it could complicate the paperwork.
Right.
And
It
so,
seems like it would be hard to get away with that if it was just a lone doctor, considering that it's not like you're just doing this by yourself. You got nurses, you got paperwork that's got to get
right.
filled out, you got all sorts of stuff going on. I mean, it seems like people are going to know. It's not like you can just do this when no one's looking. It seems like you're going to get caught. So, I mean,
Right.
it seems
So
like there's more than one person, but who knows? We don't
right,
know
but
the
who knows? Like, what
details.
do we mean when we say it's more than one person? Do we mean that
Right.
it's like a group of doctors who like agreed to do this, or do we like?
Yeah.
So again, it becomes really difficult. But again, there's the important thing to take away from this is that there is reason to think, minimal reasons right now starting to emerge to think that it could have to do with concerns over paperwork. That, oh well, if these migrant women get pregnant, or if they have a baby while at the detention center, that it's more difficult to deport, and they were trying to simplify the legal. I mean, my God, right?
Yeah.
My God, because one of the other talking points, Chris, right now going around is from a number of people is like, well, why did they do it to the women? They didn't do, for instance, a vasectomy to the men, which is reversible. Which, by the way, I want to be super clear when I say that, not acceptable either, completely unacceptable
Right.
either. But there are some people pointing out that there's like a kind of sexism involved there,
Mm.
and it is the case that the concern over women getting pregnant would explain that aspect of the evil. It's so hard to talk about this, Chris. It's so hard.
Right.
Like, I'm struggling to come up with the right words, because it's like you want to explain what's going on, but you also have to like thoroughly condemn it every single step
Right.
of the way. Yeah, I mean, this is without a doubt, I would say, Chris, actually, we've been sort of making videos and doing this stream for a few months now. Without a doubt, this right now is probably the hardest and most difficult, most evil thing that I've ever made a video about,
Yeah.
ever streamed or chatted about. I mean, wow.
And you look back at history, I mean, when these kinds of things that occur, they tend to occur in, what you would kind of consider bad circumstances for a lot of the time, right? I mean, this is one of those things that's going to be, if it turns out to be what it looks like it might be, this is going to be a scar on our country that you just kind of ask, how could this be happening in the United States in 2020? How is this a thing that is occurring? Like, there's obviously like some kind of serious wrong thinking going on, that people think this is a thing that should occur. And yeah, we might never get to the bottom of it, but it's definitely upsetting that this was
Yeah.
somehow considered the right thing
And
to do by somebody along the way.
yeah, at least one person, at least, right? As we were mentioning, there probably more than
Right.
one person, but at least one person thought, well, this makes sense to do, which is one person too many. And it's likely, again, more than one person. And,
Yeah.
this is one of those things, though, Chris, that I suspect in 30 years or whatever, they're going to read about this in the history books and they're going to think, well, we wouldn't do this again now. This was,
Right.
they made that mistake. Because we read about these sorts of stories in history and we think,
Hmm.
well, nowadays we wouldn't do that. And then we see this story come out. This is going to
Right.
be, this is something that happens. There are real people with these kinds of, I mean, let's keep it real, genocidal. I mean, let's not try to mince words here. Like tendencies in that direction. Like, oh,
Right.
these kinds of people shouldn't be giving birth.
Right.
And I mean, again, it's so hard to talk about also because I feel like, no matter how you talk about it, you're going to be called, that you're sucking up to some side. But I don't think that this should be a politicized issue. Like
No.
this isn't even just about bashing like, Donald Trump or anything like that. I mean, this is whoever was involved in this, whoever said this was okay, and who did it. Every single person along that line, unacceptable, outside, in my view, outside of the realm of politics. We shouldn't even be having a conversation about whether or not this is acceptable behavior because it's not in any way.
Right. Yeah.
And this is all.
And who knows whether it was, if it was, I mean, whether it was government funded or not. I still think there was other people involved, because it's like that doctor that was, I forget what his name was, but the Olympic doctor that was in trouble for abusing these young gymnast girls. And it turns out there were lots of people who knew, they just didn't say
They
much
didn't say
about it, right?
anything.
It was just kind of going along. And so who knows? Maybe this is a situation of one rogue individual, and then people were staying quiet about it. But the end result is he was acting on behalf of the government.
There is a development in this story for anyone interested here. Pelosi is calling for an investigation into this, and a number of Democrats are also starting to. I did see, I think some Republicans as well are saying that this should be investigated as well. So that's,
Yeah.
bipartisanship that should be commended. That's an example of, obviously, right? So it does look like there will be some investigations. Now, there are some concerns because the particular whistleblower here filed it specifically to the DHS, right? So some people are worried that, I'm trying to zoom that in there, right? That it was brought into the DHS office, and there's some people concerned that Donald Trump or some people in the White House might do something to obscure that investigation, because that does involve specifically the executive branch. And so Donald Trump more or
Hmm.
less does have a lot of control around the executive branch that he wouldn't have if it crossed branches of government.
Right.
And so an investigation into it is going to be difficult if we don't have 100% willing parties in the executive side. And this could be, I should say, Chris, this could be an instance, like this should be an easy instance where Donald Trump could run out and he could say, this is 100% wrong, like, whatever, like not at all related to me. And he could,
Right.
like, I'm not saying that he would like score any points in terms, I mean, the stuff that he's been doing on the border is wrong, but he definitely wouldn't get any political blowback for coming out and condemning this, right? But I worry that because it's an election year, we could end up in a situation where it is difficult to investigate because of the fact that Donald Trump's election is on the line, and anything that comes
Right.
out, no matter what names they are, even if Donald Trump genuinely had no idea, even if, anyone maybe who directly knows Trump didn't have any idea and, and would have opposed it if so, it could still look really, really bad. And so I worry that there could be obstruction into the investigation, even if at the end of the day, Donald Trump himself didn't have anything to do with it, which we don't know at this point.